It was the early 1980s, and Indonesia was a country in turmoil. The economy was crumbling, prices soared, and with poverty came desperation. The streets of Jakarta, Surabaya, and Medan were no longer safe. Gangs ruled the dark alleys, preying on the weak, turning markets, bus stations, and even quiet neighborhoods into hunting grounds. Among them was Rudy, a young man with nothing but a faded tattoo and a past he couldn't outrun. He had spent years surviving in the streets, sometimes doing what he had to do, stealing, fighting, running. But he wasn't a killer, at least not yet. One evening, as he sat by a food stall, savoring his meager meal, he noticed the city had grown eerily quiet. The usual chaos was missing. The men who ruled the streets, the so-called kings of crime, had started disappearing. Rumors spread like wildfire. Bodies were found in rivers, in alleyways, and sometimes dumped right in front of their families' homes, lifeless, with bullets in their heads or ropes around their necks. No one saw anything. No one dared to ask. They simply called it Petrus, Penembak Misterius, the mysterious shooters. Rudy's heart pounded when he overheard whispers about a list, names written in secret, marked for death. The police, the military, someone or something was cleaning the city. He knew his name could be on it. Desperation pushed him to seek help from his childhood friend, Sari. She was different from him. She had built a future, a real life, working at a local hospital. She had always believed Rudy could change, that he could leave his past behind. "You need to run, Rudy," she whispered urgently, her eyes filled with worry. "Get out of the city. This isn't just about criminals anymore. They're taking anyone they suspect." "But where would I go?" His voice trembled. "This is my home." Sari took his hands. "Then fight. Turn yourself in. Show them you're not a threat. It's your only chance." But Rudy had seen what happened to those who surrendered. Some were taken away, never to be seen again. That night, he decided to disappear. But as he stepped into the shadows, sirens wailed in the distance. A black car crept down the street, the same kind people whispered about, the kind that never left witnesses. Rudy ran. He ran past the markets where he used to steal, past the alleys where he fought, past the memories of a life he no longer wanted. But in a country where fear ruled, there was nowhere to hide. And as the morning sun rose over the city, another body was found on the outskirts of town. Hands tied, a single bullet to the head. The city moved on, because in the new order there was no room for second chances. And the shadows? They never spoke of the Petrus. The news spread quickly. Another body, another name crossed off the list. The people in the market whispered among themselves, but never too loudly. Fear was the new ruler of the streets. The city had changed. Crime had plummeted overnight, but so had trust. Sari sat in her small apartment, staring blankly at the flickering television screen. The news anchors avoided saying too much, but the people knew. She knew. Rudy was gone. She clenched her fists, guilt tightening around her chest. Should she have done more? Should she have forced him to leave? Or was he always doomed the moment his name was spoken in the wrong circles? The Petrus killings were not just targeting criminals anymore. Anyone who looked suspicious, who fit the profile, tattoos, long hair, rough clothes, was at risk. Even innocent people. And now she was afraid. A knock on her door jolted her from her thoughts. Hesitant, she moved toward it. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a neatly pressed uniform, an officer. Her heart pounded. With trembling hands, she opened the door. "Good evening, Miss Sari," the officer said, his voice polite but cold. "May we come in?" She had no choice but to step aside. Two officers entered, scanning her small home as if searching for ghosts. "You were close to Rudy, weren't you?" She swallowed hard. "He was a friend." "A friend?" The officer raised an eyebrow. People say you tried to help him escape. Her breath hitched. This was it. I just told him to stay out of trouble, she said carefully, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. The officer exchanged glances with his partner. Miss Sari, I hope you understand that we are only trying to protect this city, to make it safe. For people like you. She nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. You wouldn't be hiding anything, would you? She shook her head. No, sir. A long silence, then a smile. Good. We'll be watching. The officers left, their presence lingering like a dark shadow in the room. Sari collapsed onto the floor, her body trembling. The message was clear. The Petrus weren't just after criminals anymore. They were after anyone who dared to question them. And now she was on their radar. Sari sat in the dimly lit room, her mind racing. The officer's visit was a warning, clear and deliberate. She knew they weren't just watching. They were waiting for her to make a mistake, waiting for her to disappear, just like Rudy. She couldn't let that happen. Her hands shook as she reached for her old rotary phone. There was only one person she could turn to, Bram. A former law student turned journalist, Bram had been investigating the Petrus killings, trying to expose the truth that the government desperately wanted to keep buried. She dialed the number, her pulse pounding with every ring. Click. Sorry. Bram's voice was hushed. He sounded on edge. They came to my apartment, she whispered, gripping the receiver tightly. They know I tried to help Rudy. A pause, then a sharp intake of breath. You need to get out of there, he said. Now. Sari's chest tightened. Where do I go? I have a contact, Bram said. A diplomat. He's leaving for Singapore tomorrow. If you can make it to the docks by sunrise, he'll get you on the boat. Her throat felt dry. Leaving meant abandoning everything. Her job, her home, the life she had built. But staying meant one thing. Death. She closed her eyes, gripping the phone tighter. Okay. I'll send someone to get you, Bram said. Be ready. She hung up, her mind racing. She had a few hours. Just a few hours to gather what she could and disappear. But fate had other plans. A sudden knock at the door. She froze. The officers? Had they returned? The knock came again, louder this time. Heart hammering, she grabbed a knife from the kitchen before slowly stepping toward the door. Sorry, it's me, a voice hissed from the other side. She hesitated. That voice. With a deep breath, she unlocked the door and pulled it open. And there, standing in the dim corridor, was Rudy. Bruised, bloodied, but alive. Sari gasped, covering her mouth in shock. Rudy, I thought... No time, he interrupted, stepping inside and shutting the door. I barely got away. She was speechless, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. You need to leave, he said, his voice urgent. They're coming for you. But how? They tried to kill me, he cut in. But I wasn't the only one. They're not just killing criminals anymore, Sari. They're killing witnesses. Her stomach dropped. The officer's visit, the warning. It all made sense now. Rudy gripped her shoulders, his eyes wild with desperation. You have to trust me. We have to get out of here. Sari's hands trembled. Bram said he can get me out. A boat to Singapore tomorrow at sunrise. Rudy's jaw clenched. That's not enough time. They could come any minute. She knew he was right. Then, bang! A loud thud on the door. Police, open up! Sari gasped. Rudy pulled her away from the door. Back exit, he whispered. She nodded frantically. Another bang. The door shook. Miss Sari, we know you're in there. She barely had time to grab her bag before Rudy pulled her toward the small back door leading to the alley. He cracked it open, peering outside. The street was empty. Go, he whispered. She slipped out first, her feet barely making a sound. Rudy followed, shutting the door just as the front door burst open. Where is she? Shouts erupted behind them. Heavy boots stomped against the floor. Sari and Rudy ran. They sprinted down the alley, ducking between crates and laundry lines. The sound of police officers chasing them grew louder. A gunshot rang out. Sari let out a small scream as the bullet shattered a street lamp beside her. "We won't make it to the docks," she panted. Rudy pulled her into a narrow passageway, pressing her against the wall. "Then we go somewhere they won't look," he whispered. "Where?" Rudy's eyes darkened. "We go underground." Sari hesitated, but she had no other choice. With sirens blaring behind them, they disappeared into the shadows. Sari and Rudy moved like ghosts through the underbelly of the city. The sewers reeked of rot, but it was safer than the streets above. They had no choice. "They'll keep searching," Sari whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant sirens. "We can't hide forever." Rudy's eyes were sharp, calculating. "No, we can't, but we can fight back." She frowned. "How?" "We're just not alone," Rudy interrupted. "I know people, others like me, those who escaped. We've been gathering evidence, photos and names." Sari's breath caught. "You mean there are survivors?" Rudy nodded. "Not many, but enough." A flicker of hope sparked in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. They reached an abandoned warehouse near the docks. Inside, dim candlelight revealed a dozen figures, men and women, gaunt and haunted, but determined. Among them stood Bram. "You made it," he exhaled, relief washing over his face. Sari rushed to him. "I thought you left." "I couldn't," Bram admitted. "Not when I knew the truth had to get out." He turned to Rudy. "You have the proof." Rudy pulled photos from his pocket. "Names of operatives, locations of executions. It's all here." Bram took the book as if it were a sacred artifact. This could bring the whole operation down." Sari's heart pounded. "How do we get it out?" Bram looked at the others. "We have contacts in the foreign press. If we can smuggle this out of Indonesia, the world will know what's happening." A heavy silence fell. Then, boom! The warehouse doors exploded inward. Floodlights blinded them. Shadows of soldiers filled the entrance. "Run!" someone screamed. Gunfire erupted. The room descended into chaos. Sari grabbed Rudy's hand and ran. Bram sprinted beside them, clutching the book. "We can't let them get this!" A bullet tore through his side. "Bram!" Sari shrieked. He stumbled, thrusting the book into her hands. "Go!" he gasped. Tears blurred her vision. "I won't leave you!" But Rudy pulled her away. "We have to go, Sari." She clutched the book, her heart shattering. Bram had made his choice. They fled through a side exit, darting through the dockyard. The sound of gunfire faded behind them. Ahead, the boat was waiting. Sari turned one last time, just in time to see Bram collapse, soldiers swarming him like vultures. Pain clenched her chest, but she kept running. She had to. The world needed to know. As the boat slipped into the darkness, Sari whispered a silent promise. "We will remember, and the truth, it would never die."